I'd like to say welcome to all of our online worship friends again. It's always good to know that there are people who may not be able to come to an in-person worship service with us on any given Sunday, but are still connecting with us in this digital forum, and we hope that it's helpful for you in your journey either with God or toward God if you're still exploring the Christian faith. By the way, if you live locally here where we are in Rusagonis, for the next 6 weeks or so, we're going to be worshiping outdoors in our parking lot. Has a drive-in service, kind of weather permitting. And so we just encourage you to come out and join us if you're able to. We'd love to see you here. But like I said, regardless of what way you choose to connect with us, we're just genuinely thankful that you're with us. And for the past couple of weeks here in Rusagonis at the church here, we've been working our way through a series of messages, our summer series actually, called Friendology, a study of friendship in the Bible, where with each installment, we're going to be focusing on a different friendship in the Word of God, and really just drawing from those friendships a few ideas, a few principles, concepts that might be applicable to more modern friendships in a way that reflects well on our Christian faith. And so a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the relationship between David and Jonathan, which is maybe the most famous friendship in the Bible, and we talked about the sacrifices specifically that Jonathan had to make in order to help his friend kind of rise to the level of his potential. So that was week one. And then last week we looked at the friendship between Paul and Timothy, which was more of an intergenerational friendship, where Paul was kind of stepping into a void or stepping into a gap for this younger Christ follower to help him find his way spiritually. Paul actually called Timothy his son in the faith. You might remember that. And so for this morning's message, the friendship that I'd like for us to add to the list, it's going to be a growing list throughout the summer, is the friendship that actually takes place between Jesus and a woman who's known to us biblically as Mary Magdalene. And so obviously this is a bit different because anytime we bring Jesus into the story directly like this, there's always going to be a different dynamic at play because of the fact that the people who were Jesus' closest friends were also, for the most part, some of his most devoted disciples. That's just how it is. Whenever a person really got close to Jesus and discovered who he was, what he was about, what his mission was, and this is as true today as it was back then, the natural thing for them was always to join him in that mission as one of his followers. But of all the followers Jesus had, and he built up quite a company of them during his ministry years, by the end of it, he couldn't go anywhere without large crowds of people tuning in to see him or showing up. But from what we can reasonably tell, though, of all the followers he had, no one was more committed to him and devoted as a friend even than Mary Magdalene was. Like Peter, he had a few personal talks with Jesus that were meaningful, like he was a good friend. John liked to call himself the one that Jesus loved. That's how he referred to himself in his own gospel. But I'm just going to say it, neither of those men were any better friend to Jesus than Mary. And the reason I feel like I can say that is tied, in part at least, to the incident that Mary is most famous for that took place when Jesus died and was raised from the dead. And by the way, let me just stop here for a second. Whenever I talk about Mary, I always feel like I should say because it can be a bit confusing otherwise, that there are a bunch of different Marys that get mentioned in the Bible. Like you might remember when Jesus was being executed on the cross, according to John's Gospel in chapter 19 and verse 25, standing near the cross were Jesus' mother, whose name was Mary, and his mother's sister, who's apparently the only non-Mary in the group. She's the outlier here. Mary, the wife of Clopas, and of course, Mary Magdalene. So there's 4 women in one verse, and 3 of them named Mary. Like they should have formed a girl band or something, the 3 Marys. I think it might have caught on. And then, of course, in addition to that, Jesus had another good friend, Mary, who was a sister to Martha and Lazarus in Bethany, who's given quite a bit of space in the scriptures. And then there's a few other Marys that are kind of sprinkled in other places for good measure. At least one researcher said that in first century Palestine in general, as high as 25% of girls and women in that area were named Mary, which I don't know if that's true or not. It's kind of hard to nail that down at this point, right? But clearly, if there were that many Marys around, there were bound to be a few of them who were associated with Jesus, and we see that in the scriptures. But it's Mary Magdalene, a follower of Jesus from Magdala originally, a small fishing village on the shore of the Galilean Sea, who we're talking about specifically today. That's the Mary that we're talking about. And as I was starting to say before I got sidetracked, quite famously, Mary Magdalene was the one who arrived first at the tomb on the third day after Jesus died. And then she also became, because of that really, became the first human being that Jesus appeared to after he rose from the dead. That's how it went down. According to the scriptures, that's how it went. Listen to this from John 20 now. It says in verse 1 that early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. Like nobody else had been there yet, because they'd just come through the Sabbath day of rest when no one was moving around. They were by law, they were obligated to stay at home, and she arrived so early that day that she was the first one to see the tomb exposed again like that. And then there's this whole next interlude that happens next where, frightened, she kind of runs and tells the disciples what she's discovered. And Peter and John, they do their thing and they sweep in and out like a whirlwind, kind of intent on spreading the news. But Mary stays. In the account, she stays. As a follower of Jesus, she could have went with him. She maybe should have. But as a friend of Jesus, she's not in a rush to leave. And to be honest, she's still a little bit overwhelmed. Like the last time she saw Jesus, her friend Jesus, they were putting his body wrapped in strips of linen as grave clothes inside the burial vault. Only the vault is broken open now, and she's looking inside, and she's remembering things. She's reflecting on things. She's still troubled a bit from the stone being rolled away from the entrance, but she's also just thinking about Jesus and how much he clearly meant to her personally. And then she hears him speak her name. Mary, Jesus said in verse 16. She turned to him and cried out, Rabboni, which is Hebrew for teacher. And we know at that point that they embrace, because Jesus actually has to tell her to let go of him and go and share with the others what she had seen and heard from him. And she does it. But don't miss this. Of all the people that Jesus knew, of all of his followers and his family members and the people he shared life with and did ministry with, came into contact with, spent time with on a regular basis, even a daily basis for some, of all the people, the person that he chooses to reveal himself to first after he'd been risen from the dead is Mary. That's why I say that she was as close a friend as anyone. Peter and John were there for a little while too. Jesus could have shown up when they were on the scene. It's not like he appeared and went, oh man, those guys took off too quick. I just missed them. No, this was intentional, as was everything else that Jesus did. The rest of them, they'd all have their moments with him. But he saved this singular, personal, one-on-one encounter for his good friend Mary. And here's an interesting little note for you. Later on, when the story of the resurrection eventually gets communicated to Paul, who wasn't part of the Christian community at this point, like he joined the movement later on, apparently Mary's experience gets left out of the story. Because in 1 Corinthians 15:4, Paul makes a list of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances in one of his letters, as it's been told to him. And he's pretty thorough. He says, Jesus was buried and he was raised from the dead on the third day, just as the scriptures said. And he was seen by Peter and by the 12, Peter, Andrew, James, John, all the other guys. And after that, he was seen by more than 500 of his followers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some had died, he says. And then he was seen by James and later by all the apostles. And last of all, as though I had been born at the wrong time, Paul says, I also saw him, for I am the least of all the apostles. It's almost like he's kind of like mathematical about it. He's got one of those brains where it needs to be organized and listed directly that way. But like every time that Jesus showed up to see people after he was resurrected, Paul's got it on the list. But you notice what appearance doesn't get mentioned? It's the very first one that he made to Mary on the day that he rose from the dead. And we can't pin that on Paul because, that's the way the story got told to him, I'm sure. Maybe it's because Peter and some of the others were a bit more vocal about it, and so that's what got remembered and passed down. Probably some of it had to do with the fact that Mary was a woman, and in the ancient world, in the first century, women weren't considered to be reliable witnesses, as ridiculous as that sounds to us now. But regardless of how the story got told, in the early generations of the Christian church, we know from this eyewitness biblical account over in John 20 that Jesus appeared first to his friend Mary. He wanted to share that good news with her first. And some of you have friends like that, I'm sure, like that when there's something that you want to celebrate in your life, some good news you want to share, they're the first person that comes to mind for you. Like, do you have a friend like that? You don't want anybody else to know until they know. In fact, you'd be upset if they found out from somebody else. Now, we're just starting to come through a pandemic that's gone on longer than most of us imagined it. We've talked about it a lot. You know, it started in March of last year, and I was one of the dumb ones that thought it would be over in time for Easter, you know. But it's been a long season, hasn't it? And for large stretches of it, we've been more isolated from our friends than ever before. And even outside of the pandemic, because we can't blame everything on COVID, largely because of the increasing social media obsession all around us, sociologists have been telling us that we're now living in a world that is simultaneously more connected and less connected than we've ever been before. Which is just to say that you might know that what someone had for lunch on Wednesday because they posted a picture of it on their Instagram account, but in terms of meaningful relationship building, that's happening less and less. And so it's not a given that when you start to think about who you would want to share good news with first, that someone will immediately come to mind for you. That might not be the way it is for some people. And you know, that's okay. That's where you are right now. But if you do have that kind of friend, then here's what I'm willing to guess about your friendship. And I might be wrong because this isn't science or anything, and I haven't conducted any surveys, but I'm willing to bet that for most people in our world, the person that you will want to share the news with first when something good is happening in your life is also the person that you've gone to and who stood beside you when things weren't going so great. You know, it's interesting because clearly Mary was there for Jesus when he was going through hardship. Like, that's the part that's quite famous about her story. The scriptures are pretty clear on this. When many of his other close friends, all the men that were close to him there, went into hiding at his crucifixion, Mary was one of just a handful of people who were there at the foot of the cross until the very end. But the thing that sometimes gets forgotten about Mary is that Jesus had apparently been there for her during a pretty difficult period of her own life as well. And we don't know a lot about it, unfortunately. The Bible doesn't detail this out for us. The best we get comes from a throwaway comment almost in Luke 8, where the Bible writer is listing a bunch of people who toured with Jesus and supported him financially, or were financially independent, could support him in that way. And then among them was Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. That's how it's worded in Luke 8 too, 7 demons. And we don't know what those demons amounted to in Mary's life, frankly. Like, clearly it was some kind of multi-layered oppression, spiritual oppression really, that had overwhelmed her and taken control in some way. We don't have enough information to know what it looked like specifically for her, and so we don't want to guess what that would be. But some of us know what it's like to be oppressed, don't we? Or we know other people who are struggling with something where it seems like it's got a hold of their life and just doesn't want to let go. Unhealthy relationships, addictions, debt, jealousy, bitterness, even illnesses of one kind or another. Like, the list can go on for a while. And again, because this is a Jesus story, the big takeaway from that is that Jesus can help us deal with our own demons so that one chapter of our lives doesn't have to dominate the whole book, so to speak. Like, God can deliver us. God can heal us. He can lift us up and dust us off and set us back on a pathway to wholeness with him. He can do all of that. But the other takeaway here about friendship in general is that when we are there for people in their difficult moments, when it's sometimes hard to be present and when most other people in their lives have fallen away, very often, not always, but very often, the friendships that are forged in those kinds of moments will be returned on us when we're going through our own difficulties. And when it comes time to celebrate the victories in our lives, we'll know who we want to share it with first. Each week, we've been attaching a tagline to the friendships that we've been looking at. And this is the tagline for Jesus and Mary Magdalene's friendship that I wanted to tag it onto it with this. It's this. It's a friendship that perseveres. Or if I can expand on that, it's a friendship that perseveres through another person's hardship long enough that they'll be around to celebrate with them when the season of hardship is past. And so today, may God give you a couple of things. May he give you friendships that persevere in your own life, like Proverbs 17:17 says that a friend is always loyal and a brother or sister is born to help in time of need. And may he also remind each of us that even outside of those kinds of human friendships, that he is willing to be that kind of friend to us. As Jesus himself said in John 15, quite prophetically, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends, which is exactly what he did for us 2,000 years ago at Calvary. God bless you. Let's just close in prayer. Thanks again for coming and joining us. Again, let's close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful today for the friendship that you allow us to see in your word between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. We're adding it to our list of friendships that we're studying. We're thankful for it. We see how it was a friendship that was born out of adversity in Mary's life first, but that developed into a true friendship where each was there for the other. And we desire those relationships in our own lives, those friendships. We desire them on a human level, but even more, we desire it on a spiritual level in our journey with you. God, if we've never thought of Jesus as a friend before, challenge our thinking. In fact, remind us of the length and the depth and the width of Jesus' love and his commitment to us that took him to a criminal's cross on our behalf. And may that good news be the news that we want to share not only with our nearest friends here on earth, but with everyone that we come into contact with. Hear our prayers, O Lord, we pray. In Jesus' name.